some of the challenges that we're facing and where we're trying to go, and potentially some ways that you might be able to help us. We're also then just going to have a quick chat about the rough conduct rule and then pre-season visits. Don't worry, it's not going to be a really technical breakdown of the rule or anything like that, but just a bit of an overview of what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so the first question is, what makes a good umpire? I thought we'll go back right to the start and say, why do we even really have them? So think about the basics of playing sport, right? So playing with a brother or sister or friend in the backyard. And basically you just agree on what the rules are going to be, right? Then everything's fine until somebody goes, no, that's not what happened. No, that's not what happened. No, you're cheating. No, I'm upset. With the kids, one of them then runs off crying. With adults, we leave the game, we go, geez, that wasn't actually that much fun, right? You know, we actually want to have a fun game, but now I just didn't enjoy that. So what we do is we then think about, do we want somebody independent who can settle our disputes? So the kids will go running to mum and dad. Mum, what's, you know, my brother's just hit me. Don't hit him. Okay, done. That's easy. Parents might not actually know the rules of the game though. The rules have been decided. Maybe hitting somebody's in the rules. I don't know. So really, the most fundamental thing in terms of what an umpire is that there's somebody that acts impartially. There's somebody who has no actual connection to the game other than they come in to try and make it better and help. As I said, it helps if we have somebody who actually knows what the rules are. So who applies the rules that have been decided accurately. What's really important is that the umpire doesn't decide what the rules of the game are. The rules of the game have been predetermined by various systems and processes. It might be just mum and dad and the kids deciding what they want to do. In our case, it might be the AFL and the AFL Commission deciding what the rules are, and then footy ops deciding and the club community deciding what we're going to do. All the umpire is doing is applying those rules to scenarios that happen on the game day. So in that sense, what we're really saying is that the umpire's role is to provide independent decision-making to try to make the game better. That's what umpires are doing. They're not trying to impose their own views on what the rules should be. The reason I mention this now is we'll come back to in a minute. So who are our umpires? Umpires come from a very wide variety of backgrounds, and their motivations for participation vary significantly. So while in the footy club world, most of the people who want to come and play footy do so for a fairly constrained number of reasons, umpiring, it can be really, really broad. Someone like Daniel up the top, so he's a young umpire who's studying sports science, wants to be a teacher. The reason he umpires with us is because he wants to go to the AFL and be an AFL umpire, and hopefully one day he will be. Next to him, we've got Michael. Now, Michael has no ambitions to go to the AFL. For Daniel, the bit of cash he gets as a uni student is useful. Michael's turning up to his games in his BMW. He earns more than twice what I earn. He's doing okay. He doesn't care about the cash, right? He's here for a very different motivation. Peter Teasdale, Tease has been around for a long time, and most of you will have known him. A lot of you will know him through the years. His motivation is different again, right? He's not here because he wants to meet young friends. He's here for a completely different purpose. But the one thing that all these people have in common is that they have nothing connected to the outcome of the result of the game that you're playing. They're all here for reasons that are extrinsic to the game. So we've got over 500 listed umpires across all of our disciplines. I think it's probably closer to 550, is that right, Steve? Yeah, so about 550 people. Availability for us varies quite a lot. Most weekends towards the end of the season, we'll be able to appoint between 350 and 380 umpires. Summer holidays in Europe have become a real thing. I don't know if they've that's an issue for some of the clubs. Yep. I can't blame the kids. You know, a lot of them lost that European gap year to COVID, and so they're now making the most of that. So we do certainly struggle through the middle of the year, like everybody. And we appoint approximately 180 field umpires each week across 100 games. So it's not a small operation to sort of deal with 550 people. Now, this is something that has definitely changed over the years. So the numbers might be a little bit hard to see, but basically this is a graph showing our breakdown by umpire age. Under 16 is the one on the left. Then we've got 16 to 20, 21 to 25, and then 5-year increments up to 71 plus on the right. 38% of our umpires are under 18. That's something that 15 years ago when I started was unheard of. As a 17-year-old, when I started in the amateurs, I was invited to do 5 under-19s games to effectively trial, because the idea of having people under 18 was, you know, there were people under 18, but it wasn't that common. Now 38% of our umpires are there. Okay, so that creates a few challenges for us. So all of you who've got under-19s teams, I'm sure you know what a lot of those challenges are around communicating with that group, communicating with 16-year-olds and communicating with 71-year-olds, 80-year-olds is very, very different. This recent batch has become even more challenging for us. As a general rule, they are probably a little bit less consistently available, and they need a lot more management. They are obviously, young umpires are really resource intensive for us. To coach somebody who is new in the basics of the laws when they don't have self-analysis skills yet is quite difficult, and it means we need to have quite hands-on ratios with those umpires. 45-year-olds we're much more able just to have that light touch to improve them. The second problem we have, or challenge we have, which affects all of the clubs I know, is that variability really affects our under-19s competition and our women's competition, where week in, week out, we struggle to be able to consistently provide umpires. Some weeks we can fill the grades, some weeks we can't. We know that that's a big problem for you. The other element in terms of setting standards long term is that the reality is that our best umpires, the ones that we put in our highest games and do our Premier Grand Final, they are not in the 16 to 20 year bracket. We have lots of really good, talented umpires who are 17, 18, but you add experience to that talent and then you start to get a really, really good umpire. So the average age last year for our Premier to Premier C field umpire grand finalists was 33. So our view of this chart is that it's awesome that we have so many in that 16 to 20 bracket who are showing the talent, but we need to find a way to help flatten that graph, not by lowering that, but by retaining them. So we need to find a way to keep your 20-year-old as they get into those older age brackets, because they're just going to become better umpires. So how do we do that? It's really, really hard. And this is where I'm going to talk about what we're doing, and then we'll talk about where you can help us. The big thing in life that changes around this time is you go from being at school and then being at university, where you don't have that many demands on your time, to through the university phase and then into the workforce, where all of a sudden we now have to compete for the attention of umpires compared to other things they're doing in life, right? They discover boys and girls. They discover going out on a Friday night. You can't go out on a Friday night and umpire a Premier game of footy on a Saturday. So we have to compete with that and make this a place that they actually want to return year on year. So we've had a massive increase over the last couple of years and investment in our coaching. So thanks to Steve and the VAFA more broadly, we are investing in more and more coaches to try and bring down some of our coaching ratios, right? We have a coaching team of 11, right? It might sound luxurious to have 11 umpires, coaches in a group. What happened to the old days where you had one umpire manager that was Benny and that was it? The reality is that even at that ratio, that's one coach to every 50 umpires. In terms of actually getting out and interacting with that individual, that's about on average, 1.5 times a year that I can go and see somebody umpire a game live. Right? Now, if you're a 16 to 20-year-old umpire who we're trying to say, we love you, we want you to stay, we enjoy having you around, obviously you see that us engaging 1.5 times a year ain't going to cut it. Right? With a ratio of 50 umpires to one coach, I would need 4 hours a week to spend 5 minutes with each individual. Right. So the sheer numbers that we have in this competition make it really, really hard. So we're growing, we're trying to fix that. So as I said, we've increased the number of coaches. We are focusing our coaching attention on the places that we can actually get really good benefits. We're using technology to try and break down some of the issues we get into training. We do video coaching now. We really heavily rely on VAFA TV as well. So we use that. We've invested in software to help us do analysis similar to some of the software that you would be using. So these are some of the things we're trying to do. We're in a really good place with a lot of this, but in terms of how we then grow this to fill every game in the VAFA, for example, that's a challenge. The thing I want to quickly touch on, I know I'm prattling on a bit here. The thing I want to quickly touch on is how you can help us. And that's around unsurprisingly, it's around match day environment. It's by far and away the thing that has the biggest effect on umpire retention. What we find though is that people don't necessarily declare that is the reason that they don't want to come back. So there's a few elements to this. So start with the little things. Okay. So back at the start, I talked about the fact that the person that's coming in to umpire your game has no connection to that game. They really don't care who wins the game, right? Their interest is in fulfilling their role that they've been asked to fulfill to the best of their ability. Just for the moment, I'd like you to put your, just engage your brain a little bit and think about if you were somebody who was not connected to a club and you're asking that, and you've been asked to come in, what are the kinds of things that the environment, match day environment, would appeal to you, would be neutral, and which ones would actually be pretty discouraging for retention, right? What we find is it's not necessarily big things. One thing I remember seeing last year was the umpires were in the umpires' rooms, and the match had ended. It was a wet day. The match had ended, and some of the parents or the supporters had said, "Okay, we're going to put away the padding from the posts." So they grabbed the padding, and they're doing their job. They're doing exactly the right thing for the club. They've been really helpful. They've gone out, they've grabbed the padding off the posts, and they're going to go and put it where it's stored. It's stored in the umpires' rooms, which is not uncommon, right? So we've got a team of 6 umpires in a room that we already know is probably built for 2. There's nothing you can do about that. We get it. But then all of a sudden, in the middle of trying to do their paperwork on their phone, hands are cold, already, not necessarily enjoying themselves that much with how cold it is, trying to fill in the paperwork. In come the spectators and say, "Hey, sorry guys, we've got to put the pads away." Right? So now these 6 umpires are shoved out of the way into one tiny part of the umpires' rooms because the padding has to be put away. No one's at fault there. No one's done anything wrong. There's no intent for insult. No one's being disrespectful. But that's not a great feeling as an umpire, to be, as somebody who is a guest effectively of the club, to feel like, I'm not as important as putting the pads away on time, right? Little things that just add up over time that can be really, really simply done. And it's not, as I said, there is no one meaning offence in anything like that. So what I would say is, before the start of the year, just have a think about, if I was coming to this club and I actually don't really care about the club or the game, I'm a neutral, what would I like and dislike about the experience that as a club I am providing to this person? It's not about palatial rooms. Everyone fully understands it's, you can't knock down walls and give umpires spa baths. But, are the umpires wrestling with spiders in the change rooms? Is the toilet seat broken? That's pretty common. And it's those little things that, in terms of creating an environment, helps us. The second one, which we all know, is umpire abuse, right? Umpire abuse is absolutely rife in football, full stop, right? It happens at the amateurs. I know a lot of you will sit there and probably say, it doesn't happen at my club. I guarantee you it absolutely happens at your club. Varying degrees. Some clubs are really good. Some environments the clubs are really good, but the spectators aren't. It happens, right? Umpire abuse happens. When I talk about umpire abuse, I'm not talking about people getting vocal and disputing decisions, right? We're not saying, people shouting ball or saying you're blind, umpire. I don't know any umpires that care about that stuff, right? Never. It's part of the game. If people weren't shouting ball for a holding the ball decision, it'd be very boring and no one would want to be there, including umpires. It'd be horrible. It's when it turns personal, right? And it does, right? And it does more often than you probably realise. My message, I guess, to you guys is to think about that challenge we have in trying to transition 18, 16, 17, 18-year-olds into longer-term umpires. When I have a decision to make about what I want to do next year, and I'm weighing up going out with my mates on a Friday night, playing basketball with my friends, or being an umpire, think about how all of these things weigh on that decision. It sounds like a bad news story, and I know this sounds like a lecture, but what I'm trying to get across is actually the things on the previous slide cost money. I cost money. Thanks, Steve. All of our coaches cost money. The technology costs money. Video and games cost money. All of this is free. Every single bit about this is free, right? What I hope you take away from this is that actually, as the club leaders, you have so much more power and influence over umpire abuse than you may realise. It's just like, I remember umpiring a game at Zavs a number of years ago, and there was a first gamer, an 18-year-old first gamer in the ones, and he was just giving this to me all day. And I just kept saying, mate, if you do this, you're going to give away a free kick. I'm going to have to pay the 50 here. Just leave it. He didn't listen to me. But I'll tell you what, when Chopper Handley rocked up and said, mate, shut up, that was the end of it. That was the end of it. Never heard another word from him for the rest of the day. As a goal umpire, I used to goal umpire for a couple of years, and I stood there and you would get that abuse from behind the goals, right? It happens. When the club president walks around behind the goals and says, guys, this isn't who we are as a club, it stops. It stops in a heartbeat, right? So what I'm saying to you, as the leaders of your clubs, you have so much power as the captains, as the coaches, as the officials, to actually make the umpiring environment so much better. And it's not about perfection. It is never going to be perfect. Umpires are still going to cop it. We know that. We're never going to be in palatial umpires' rooms. We get it. But those little things you can do that don't cost much will make a huge difference in the short term to the medium term about how we retain these umpires. And in the longer term, what that means is you're going to have better umpires. You're going to have more support from us, and everyone will be happy. And here endeth that lecture. Now I'll talk about the more interesting stuff. Well, I know that sounds like a lecture, but I do mean it. And, we want to help. At the end of the day, umpires are really just here to support the clubs. If there's no football, we hear lines like, without, I go to after matches and we hear lines like, well, if there was no umpires, we wouldn't have a game. It's like, yes, you would. You'd go out, you'd have a kick around, and you'd get one of the resis to umpire the game or whatever. You would have a game without us. But we are trying to, in time, make the experience better for you. But it's all for you guys as clubs. That's the only reason we exist. Without footy, there's no umpiring. Even though, yes, some umpires might disagree with it. Okay, so very quickly want to talk to rough conduct. How many of you were in the concussion one? Okay, so you pretty much know why this stuff exists now, right? This is the introduction to the laws of football, right? Just the introduction. It's the spirit and intention of these laws that a free kick shall be awarded to be, where possible, in a contact sport, protect players from sustaining injury. Right? So the whole point of the laws is that we want to make sure it's fair and in the spirit of sportsmanship as number one, and number two, we want to make sure people don't get injured as much as possible in our contact sport. So what we do is we have the rough conduct law. The way the laws basically work in terms of this, there is some overlap, but to think of it simply, prohibited contact is a law that says this is the contact you can and can't make against somebody, and this is when you can and can't do it. I can tackle somebody who has the ball. I cannot tackle them high, I can't tackle them around the legs, and I can't tackle them when they don't have the ball. That's prohibited contact. What rough conduct is about is when I would otherwise be allowed to make the contact. It goes a little bit further than that, but at its crux, it's saying, well, I have the ball, it is legitimate for me to be tackled, but there is a way in which it is unreasonable to do that. So that's probably the big thing that this law adds. It's actually really simple. Any conduct against an opposition player which in the circumstances is unreasonable. Pretty broad. What's unreasonable? What's reasonable? How do we actually make sure that we're applying this consistently? So, the AFL helpfully give us 4 categories that are clearly ins. These things are unreasonable. Dangerous tackle, forceful contact below the knees, sliding knees or feet first into an opponent, and using your studs. Those are 4 clear categories that the AFL has said these things are unreasonable. Okay? There's another big catch-all, which is unreasonable in the circumstances. An example of where that comes out is if somebody is near the boundary line and you bump them in a manner that means they are going to hit the fence. Right? The law says it is fine to bump somebody who has the ball in the field of play, the player's live, it is legal to bump them. It is not reasonable to bump them if the likely outcome is injury because you have bumped them into a fence. So that's kind of the key of this law. Rough conduct gives us a lot of challenges. One, because it's very much in the eye of the beholder, what's unreasonable and what's not. The other reason is because there is a culture around these free kicks. That's either, oh, umpire, you're being soft, because people want to see good old-fashioned hard football. And there is a lot of vitriol that comes over the fence when we pay these. I would say there's more abuse that we cop about dangerous tackle free kicks or non-dangerous tackle free kicks than nearly anything else in the rules. That makes it really hard for me to get consistency, particularly across the really young umpires. If you're a 16, 17-year-old umpire doing an early senior game of football, when you pay a dangerous tackle free kick and you get launched at by the crowd saying, you're soft, what are you doing, and you're ruining the game, when that's a decision that you've had to make based on what you think is unreasonable, that's really hard for me to come back and back and back and get them to pay it. By the time they're at senior football, they should be beyond that. Let's try that in under 19 football. And we know that we have trouble with that, and that we get feedback from clubs saying, we want you to protect the ball player more, particularly in underage football. We also get the same response the other way, saying, no, actually, you're paying free kicks that are soft. So we cop it both ways on that one. So what we're doing is we do a lot of coaching on rough conduct because we understand how significant it is to the game. We talk to umpires about the role that they are playing in making the game safer. One role. So as a football community, we all are playing a role in making it safer for participants, right? So those in concussion thing would be, okay, we can't let these, if somebody does cop a high bump or somebody gets put into the ground, we actually need to protect them over the longer term so we don't put them out there the next week, right? That's one role. The tribunal has a role in suspending players that are found guilty of dangerous tackles. The coaches and officials at the clubs have a role because we educate players on how to play the game safely. What is the correct tackling technique? So we talk about our role in that and how it's vital that we do. And we really do talk about removing that sort of, the stigma is probably not quite the right word, but that culture around, if I pay a dangerous tackle free kick, it's almost like I'm accusing the player of doing something dirty. And if I pay a forceful front-on contact with someone with their head over the ball, trying to get rid of that and go, actually, no, it's just another free kick for us. Again, some more homework for you, just some things that would really help us, particularly in underage football. Try and support umpires who actually get out there and pay rough conduct free kicks. If you see umpires who are actually stepping up and doing their job in protecting players from this kind of conduct, please do what you can. And I know in the heat of the moment, I'm not saying everybody stand there and give them a round of applause and say, well done, but try to have the attitude of thinking it's a positive that the kids actually had the guts to stand up and try and protect the player. Where you can, do a little bit of education around, to your clubs around why. You've seen you've been to the concussion conferences. Help drag that through the entire club so that they understand. So maybe we don't get quite as much vitriol coming across the fence for this specific type of free kick. The last one is try and think carefully about your messaging when you go to the tribunal with these. It is 100% your right to challenge reports at the tribunal. This is not suggesting that you shouldn't go in and defend your player as you would. There is a difference between conduct that is worthy of a free kick, that is dangerous and is worthy of a free kick, and conduct that the tribunal will suspend for. Okay, so what I just have seen a few times is there are actions that are clearly dangerous. They are absolutely actions we do not want in our game. They go to the tribunal, and the tribunal says this does not meet the standard for suspending the player. You then overhear the conversation on the way out that says, yeah, mate, you did nothing wrong. That's not true. You didn't play the game correctly. You didn't have adequate protection for your opponent. It should just not have been reported. You shouldn't be suspended for what you did, but actually the action was dangerous, and we don't want that. And that's the thing as coaches, as clubs, you can actually say to players, even if you identify dangerous tackles, even if the umpire doesn't play a free kick, you can say, actually, that's not kind of what we want. That's not how football's played anymore. Educate. So just have a think about that when it comes up. It comes up very often, just because of the nature of the kind of reports they are. I think to just expand on that, there's a lot of work being done to try and establish these bases. What we've found is that they tend to be very effective at getting engagement of the 16 to 20-year-olds. The problem we have is then how we bring them in. So if I've got a premier umpire group, for example, where I might have 25 umpires through the year who umpire the premier football, how do we make sure that those guys who are probably 25, 30, 35, the reason they come to train, the reason they participate is because of their friendship groups. And making sure that we can actually link the fact that we've got umpires who are from the southeast and from the north who are umpiring games together. So it's being worked on. It's a real issue. I don't know that, we have tried them extensively, and quite often they sort of reach a natural conclusion when a group that was from that area then move on, and what was convenient for those guys sort of separates. But it's a very, very good issue. The school program you talked about is a really interesting one. So Steve and the AFL were doing a lot of work over the last couple of years in the school umpire program. So any of you who are from the schools who are interested, please have a chat to Steve about trying to get in, and it can be at various different age levels, but actually getting umpiring into the sports curriculum of the school, and then transitioning them into umpiring. Again, part of the catch with that, which we always have, it's a long-standing challenge, is we have junior leagues, we have senior leagues. There is a minimum experience and skill set level that we would like to put out into certainly under 19 boys football. It is challenging to umpire. And putting 16-year-olds in a game of under 19s football is hard. We don't want to do it all the time, but then when you see that we have 38% of our group is those umpires, how do you do it? So you end up in a world where we have kids who are umpiring on a Sunday at South Metro or Yarra Juniors who don't umpire in the top division of that competition. So they won't be umpiring under 17s, they'll be umpiring under 14s, because that's where that junior league sees them. But then on a Saturday, we're looking at them umpiring under 19 kids. And so it's a balance there of saying, well, actually, you're not ready for umpiring in a senior competition, contrasted with not being able to provide you with any umpires. So we weigh that up and we try and balance it individually.
We'll just quickly touch on club visits. So every club will have the opportunity to have umpires come out throughout pre-season. So just keep an eye out on the club portal. We'll release some further information about that. There'll be two options in terms of what that could look like. It could be a 30-minute match simulation, or it could be the umpires running with your players during a training session. The whole aim is to build relationships, break down barriers, and give the players and coaches the opportunity to ask questions from the umpires about, latest laws, interpretations, and how they'll be umpired during the season. So we ran it last year as a pilot program, and we're happy to again expand it out to clubs this year. So keep an eye out for that in the next week or so. Might just take a couple more questions and then move on to football so they have enough time. Yes, up the back. Yep. So the question just for the recording was the prioritisation of women's football in umpiring compared to the other competitions. So what we do have is a field umpire allocation policy, which aims to provide equal numbers of umpires across men's and women's football. What we trialled last year was having a premier squad umpire or a senior squad umpire coming down to under 19s football. But we also have a policy now where men's premier umpires are no longer confined to the one league. They can move across. So we're looking at expanding our footprint in women's football and making sure that the standard of umpiring you receive in Premier B Women's and Divisional is as close to the standard that you'll receive as a men's Premier or men's Divisional club, because you are now receiving the same umpires. Rather than them be segregated into men's and women's football, they are umpires. They can umpire both men's and women's football, and that's how we see it. That's how they will be appointed throughout the season. So you're not receiving the same umpires each week. You receive umpires, from all, different standards of Premier and Divisional.
I'll just add to that. It's been something that's been on the radar for a couple of years, and it's a real challenge for us. The women's competition has grown exponentially, and our umpire numbers haven't grown with it. And each different sort of group of football has different demands on individuals, and trying to match the skill set of the umpire with the football is really quite hard. The solution is that we have more and more umpires, and the more we get, we can fill it. But there are umpires that we have in potentially doing a low grade under 19s game that we wouldn't necessarily think would match the women's game very well. And we want to make sure that the umpires we do provide understand the context of the competition. And we started last year really trying to focus on the Premier Women's to try and really go, okay, we need to make sure that the Premier Women's competition is receiving, as close as we can standard of umpires in Premier Men's competition. So we have, as Steve was saying, we bounce umpires between those two competitions now. I would love to do that through B and C, B last year and into the women's divisions. We're not filling games across the board, so it's a challenge. But it is on the radar. It is something we're trying to increase having more senior umpires across there as well. We run into this balance then around saying, okay, we often do put less experienced umpires into the women's competition. They tend to still filter quite high in that competition. That is a reality. We then run into problems that they are very inexperienced. So then we end up putting an umpire on the ground who is really inexperienced. And the reality is, I probably shouldn't say this as the umpire's coach, but there is a reality that there are some games that a club umpire is going to do a better job than a 15-year-old who's never done senior footy before. And so, we want to get there, but I'm mindful of not also then dumping a whole heap of really inexperienced umpires into the women's competition, because that's not helping the competition grow either. And it's not helping the clubs if we do that. So I'm happy, please come and have a chat to us about ideas as well. But anyone who's got umpires out there, send them our way and we can filter that. Yeah.